This lack of reference to Indigenous peoples within international relations theory and literature appears to stem from a willful unwillingness to recognise Indigenous peoples as autonomous political groupings. In this manner, Beer suggests, the discipline of international relations contributes to the enduring deference of one of the most fundamental notions of settler state colonialism, the idea that Indigenous peoples do not constitute authentic political communities. Thus, as he says, broad theoretical approaches to international relations continue to effect violences upon Indigenous people through the denial and erasure of Indigenous knowledge and values as unnoticed, while the hegemonologue of what he calls that decidedly Western voice speaks to the exclusion of all others, heard by all, and yet paradoxically seldom noticed, given that its knowledges have become the common sense assumptions of what counts as truths. Thus, outside of Indigenous scholarship, almost no serious attention has been paid to examining the counter-hegemonic possibilities within Indigenous ontologies. This refusal to grant the same power or legitimacy to Indigenous philosophies that is granted to normative political discourses means, as Dale Turner has written, that we become forced to use normative discourses to argue for rights, sovereignty, and nationhood in a context that is inherently philosophically divergent from that whose language we are obliged to espouse. These normative discourses nonetheless played a key role in the oppositional politics of Indigenous peoples as part of the transformative movements of the 60s and 70s, which saw an international counter-hegemonic movement of Indigenous peoples and human rights supporters launch itself on the international stage. This international movement protested the ongoing appropriation of Indigenous lands, the loss of Indigenous languages, the loss of Indigenous social economies, and cultural knowledge and practice, and was centred around the right of Indigenous peoples to self-determination. In today's politico-economic climate, rights-based discourses have become co-opted by neoliberal ideologues to such an extent that it seems the only valued rights are economic rights. Rights to self-determination or sovereignty are recast in economic terms, as is education, as is medicine and health, as is development. In this circumstance, economic rights, like knowledge, and particularly new knowledge, which generally means an appropriation and reconfiguration of old knowledge, have become sites of fierce competition. The call for a new political ontology could hardly be more urgent. However, if we're not to repeat the same cycle of ideological struggle, then as Steve Smith argues, international relations as a discipline needs to re-examine the core assumptions it holds as truths. I think that the task that lies before us in this transformational time space, to quote Wallerstein, is to consider how we will sing the bones of a new pluri-civilizational world. It behoves us, I suggest, to think very carefully about the nature of the song we sing and of the kind of flesh with which we will cover the bones of a new world order. The realization that there are alternative futures possible means that we need not be bound by the models of capitalism and consumerism that have been tried and resoundingly failed. Included in those other civilizational models possible to us are Indigenous relational ontologies based on the core principles of interdependence of all things, of material and non-material justice, reciprocity, compassion, inclusivity, collectivity, responsibility, and a deep reverence for life. And I believe, I would argue, that these principles are shared by the majority of civilizations across the world. The key is how we connect them.